Joining me now is Mike Thornton, who was the Liberal Democrat MP for Eastleigh. Thanks very much for coming in, Mike. Until recently, there was quite a strong Liberal Democrat sort of contingent here in the Solent area, in Portsmouth particularly, obviously where you were in Eastleigh.
Yeah.
That seems to have sort of fallen a little bit by the wayside. What's happened?
Well, it depends where. I mean, Portsmouth's still very strong, still got a large number of Liberal Democrat councillors, so a strong presence on the council. In Eastleigh, we still have 38 out of 44 councillors on the on the Eastleigh Borough Council are Lib Dems. So there's still a strong presence locally. And I think obviously what happened was we got killed in the May 2015 election, and that of course carried on. But we started losing ground before then because people objected to us being in the coalition. Didn't like the fact that we were actually doing something. But I've always been in politics to try and achieve something, to try and help people, and it's much easier when you're in power to help people than it is when you're out.
Looking back on that coalition and what happened in the May 2015 general election, what do you think were the kind of key mistakes that you as a Liberal Democrat and your party made?
Well, I think what happened was, I mean, when we voted, all of us, by very large, 99% majority up at the NEC in 2010 to join the coalition, because it was a democratic vote of Lib Dem members. I was sitting next to a friend of mine, and I said, this is the right thing to do, but we're going to get our kicked at the next general election. We'll lose loads of MPs. He said, really? I said, yeah, we'll be absolutely crucified for it. And we were. And we were more crucified than I thought.
Really? It was worse than you expected?
I didn't think we'd go down to 8. I didn't think we'd go down to 8. And I think that the thing is that when we'd never been in power nationally, people could vote for us as a sort of alternative. They might not even cared what we stood for. It was a sort of, they could do a sort of it was a rebellion, if you like. When we've actually been in power, people say, oh, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Since we've been out of power, people have realised that a lot of what we did in the coalition was actually restrain the Tories from doing some of the things they wanted to do, to try and modify them to think again. And a lot of the stuff that the Tories claimed were their policies were actually our policies. And it's quite upsetting.
That must be quite hard to take.
It is. I mean, things like equal marriage, things like increasing the tax allowance so less well-off people earned less, the pupil premium. They were all Lib Dem policies, Lib Dem manifesto, not in the Tories one, and they sort of taken them over and making this wonderful.
Taking the credit for it.
Yeah.
Now, let's have a little look at Brexit. Obviously, the Lib Dems traditionally a really pro-Europe party, very in favour of the Remain camp. So you must be a bit annoyed that people don't agree with you.
Well, no, I mean, people got every right to agree. And there's a small margin in favour of leaving. That's a democratic vote. That was a referendum. I think some of it was because of the untruths, the lack of absolute accuracy in some of the Leavers campaign was there. But we're where we are, so we have to accept it. But what I think we do need to do is say no one knows what they voted for. Everyone knows what they voted to leave, but they don't know what they voted to replace it with. No one's got any idea. And there's loads of different people, some saying we should be in the single market, some not, some saying that migration's a bad thing, some saying it is. No one really knows. And Theresa May is not only stopping the British people from having a vote on it, she's stopping Parliament, which, face it, this is meant to be a democracy, they're stopping Parliament having a vote on it. And that's a very strange thing to do, to say, I'm going to do a deal with Europe and with the rest of the world, but I'm not going to let anyone have a say in it except us in the Cabinet.
And I mean, the Lib Dems are in favour of, or not in favour of, this so-called hard Brexit.
Yeah.
What does that mean? You're not in favour of a hard Brexit. What are you in favour of then?
Well, and basically, we think the best deal was being in the European Union.
Well, I mean, it's too late for that now.
It's too late for that. So I think that if we can, the hard Brexit is to have nothing to do with Europe except like maybe Brazil does. Or
what you're saying you want is you want to leave the EU in name, but actually still have the EU laws and still have the EU freedom of movement. So basically the opposite of what people in this country, a majority of them, wanted.
Well, some did, but a lot of people I talked to said they wanted the Norway solution. And the Norway solution is access to the single market. It's actually access to the single market, obeying a certain amount of EU laws to enable them to sell into Europe. We're going to have to obey their laws anyway. If you're a manufacturer and you want to sell something into France, that's in the EU, you're going to have to obey the EU laws on how it's made, etc., aren't you? Because you can't, otherwise they won't let you sell into it. So there's going to be a surprising amount of EU laws. And also, if you ask people, what EU law do you want to get rid of? And they just can't come up with one. Can you come up with an EU law?
So you're saying people don't know what they voted for?
I'm saying people voted to take what they thought was to take back control, and a lot of people voted because they're worried about immigration. But when you say take back control, what does that actually mean?
And people are worried about immigration.
Yes,
people are worried about
Absolutely.
freedom of movement. But the Lib Dems are famously very much in favour of open borders and freedom of movement.
Exactly, yeah.
Is that for everybody then? Should we be letting terrorists into our country? Should we be letting ISIS supporters into our country? We either have open borders or we don't. Well, what's the?
No, it's not open borders. It's freedom within the EU. And within the EU, even if someone's a French national and they're a criminal, we don't have to take them in under the EU laws. People misunderstand that. Because we've done so, they think we have to, but we don't. Quite clearly, if someone's a convicted criminal in France, we don't have to keep them in our country. And if someone's a terrorist, they're very likely not an EU citizen anyway. And if they are, then we can still watch them, arrest them, send them back to their country. People thought that because this country wasn't very good at sending convicted criminals back to the country they came from, that we weren't allowed to. Well, we were, and we still are.
So if let's just, in a hypothetical situation, we've left the EU.
Yeah.
Are the Lib Dems then still in favour of free movement of people and open borders with the whole rest of the world?
We never have been for the whole rest of the world.
Oh, right, so you're going to have to change that idea altogether then.
We never have been in favour of that.
So you have been in favour of free movement
within the EU,
but we're not in the EU anymore.
Exactly.
So
in
this hypothetical situation,
this
future hypothetical
situation, then we'd have to negotiate different arrangements with with the EU and arrangements. We still have. We wouldn't probably change any of the rules we've got with other countries, but we'd have to decide what we're going to have with the EU. We still have.
Isn't that a little bit favouriteist then, isn't it? You're kind of saying we like these countries and these other countries we don't like so much. You're just picking and choosing, really.
Not really. No. What we're saying was, what happens in 2 years' time, we have to completely renegotiate everything we have with the EU. At the moment, we joined a club, and one of those club rules was to allow, just like Scots can come to England and the Welsh can come to England, we said the French can come to England, the Germans can come to England, and at the same time, 2 or 3 million of our citizens can go and live abroad in Europe and have the same rights and for instance, to healthcare, like that MEP who got beaten up. Well, he gets free healthcare in the EU because he's an EU citizen, and so we've got 2 or 3 million people in Spain, in France, and Germany worried what's going to happen to them afterwards. So that's what it was. It was an exchange. It was an agreed exchange, a treaty where you said, you let our citizens go to your country and we'll let your citizens come to ours. When we're not in the EU anymore, obviously, that will change. And maybe we'll have different agreements with Australia or Canada or the United States or South America. Who knows? Maybe we'll Nigel Farage famously said he was in favour of less restrictions on people from the Indian subcontinent, which I think is not a bad idea. They're very skilled, well-educated people. And so there is a certain amount you could say, well, once we're no longer in part of the EU free movement, we could let more people in from other countries. But we're in desperate need of skilled people because we don't train them properly ourselves. We actually have a shortage of young people to do jobs because we're all getting older and we've had a very low, internally we've had a low population rate. So there will be some immigration. It's a question of where it comes from.
Mike, I think it's very fascinating times. I'm excited to have a Lib Dem MP or former Lib Dem MP agreeing with Nigel Farage on my programme. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. Thanks for coming in.
You're welcome. Cheers.